Hey guys, welcome. This is Jen Frost with Faith and Fabric, and we are back for our Free Motion Friday. Today we're going to be continuing a little bit of last week's theme. If you remember, last week we worked on water. I'll put the link up here for you, and that was that very gradual, soft water look. Today we're going to be working on a little bit more of a turbulent water feel. Any guesses which part of scripture we're going to work on today? I'll tell you. We're going to be working on the part where Jesus has just finished feeding the 5,000, and he tells all his disciples to go get in the boat, go to the other side. We'll camp there for the night, and I am going to just disperse the crowd a little bit. So all the disciples get in the boat, and they start trying to make it to the other side, and a storm comes. And the storm is huge, and it's just pounding, and there's so much wind, and the water is really choppy, and they're kind of freaking out, right? They don't know what to do. And during the fourth watch, Peter is watching, and him along with a few of the other disciples see a figure out there, and they're like, oh my gosh, what is that? Is that a ghost? They don't know what that is. And it turns out it's Jesus. And there's so many things we can talk about, like just there, right? Like, first of all, how did he get there? Because he wasn't on the boat, he sent the boat over, and he said he'll disperse the crowds. And so, that alone is like a whole miracle story unto itself. What we're going to be working on, though, is the water. So let's come back to Peter. So Peter then says, Lord, is that you? Like, if that's you, I'm going to come over to you and I'm going to walk to you. You got my back? And Jesus has his back. So Peter gets on the water, and the water's really choppy, and Peter starts walking, and the wind is blowing in his face, and there's this storm, and he looks down. He takes his eyes off Jesus. He's not looking at him. He looks down. And he starts to sink. And this is the powerful moment that I want to focus on today, because I think there's so many times in our lives when we're like that, right? We look down, we take our eyes off Jesus, we take our eyes off where they're supposed to be, and we look down into just this mess that is around us, and we lose sight, and we lose hope, and we start to be filled with despair. But what does Jesus say to him? Let's take a look. Jesus stretches out his hand and catches Peter and says to him, "Oh, you of little faith, why did you doubt?" And then they get into the boat, and the wind dies down. Now, I love that, because I feel like that's like us, right? Now, we have looked down in our world. We've taken our eyes off where they should be, and we've fallen into that despair. But as soon as we look back up and we find Christ, we find that hope, the storm around us dies down. Now, that doesn't mean it's going to go away, right? We've talked about this through so many different Fridays, how life is hard and problems are going to happen and bad things happen to good people. That's life. That has nothing to do with faith or anything else. Where our faith comes in is finding that hope even in the midst of despair, even in the midst of pain, even in the midst of that storm, of finding that hope that's going to carry you through, finding that that love that Christ is going to give you, that's going to help carry you through your own personal storms. So let's get started sewing today. I have just really one big tip for you, and the other two are more just things that you're going to need to think about before you get started sewing. The first thing you want to look at is making sure you make sharp points at each of your waves. Second and third tips are kind of combined. The second is to determine if you want to make all of your waves the same height, or if some of your waves will vary. And your third tip is to determine if you want your waves to all face in the same direction on each row, or if each row will face opposite the other. So you'll see there's a lot more determining in this one than there is tips per se. Now, obviously those tips are things you need to determine beforehand, so they're tips in and of themselves. For me, what I'm going to do is I'm probably going to be making a couple big ones, a couple small ones, make it look as realistic as possible. If you think of the ocean, every wave is not the exact same size. You've got some big sets that come through, some smaller sets that come through. So I'll be making mine big and small. I'm also going to be making my rows change direction. So my waves, they kind of look like a letter C, if you will. So on one side, they'll be opening in the direction I sew. For me, I find it's easiest to do that. It's a lot harder for me to sew them backwards, which would be making the smaller part of the C first and then the bigger part. It's easier for me to sew them so that I'm sewing them in, so that almost like Pac-Man, if you will, that they're opening up and moving in the direction that I'm sewing. So let's head over to the machine and we'll get started. So supply check, I've got some blue sulky thread in here. I've got the Me and My Sister fabric. I've got just some cotton batting here on the inside. I've got just some plain white fabric on the backing, and I've got my Slow Steady glider mat, which I cannot do without, and of course my hopper foot. Now, one thing I've done is you'll see I'm using, again, the fabric that has the lines in it. I think this is gonna help me to just keep my waves a little bit straighter. What I did do, again, this is a 10-inch piece because this is from a layer cake. So I just measured out my lines at 1.5 inches, and I skipped 1/2 inch at the top and bottom, obviously, because I needed to just work with 9 inches to divide it evenly into 1.5 inch lines. But you'll see here's a little bit of a pencil mark, and the pencil marks actually show up a little bit better than chalk on here. So I'm still trying to play with finding something that you guys can see a little bit easier. So I've got my bottom thread pulled up here. Go ahead and grab the top and we will get started. So as mentioned real quick, I'm going to be making my waves varied. So you'll see the variation move a little bit. So let's get started. So I'm going to come through here, start with my wave. I'll start with a nice small one here, and you'll see the point here. You make that sharp point and then you come back and you hit that bottom line. Make a bigger wave this time. My husband is a surfer, and not only does he look adorable when he's in his wetsuit, he's so handsome, but you know, he's always waiting for the next big set. So that's kind of what I'm working on here. So I've got a couple waves of different sizes, again, each time returning to that line. Now, when you think of waves, you know, the power of the wave is really in the back of the wave. That's where a lot of the weight is. So when you quilt your stitches, when you make your stitches, you want to make sure that's kind of where you're putting your power of your wave too. You know, you want that nice sharp point where the wave starts to fall and break, and then you've got the weight of the wave behind it. So I'll squeeze a nice smaller one in here, come back to the end of that line, and then to finish this off, I'm just going to come straight over, and you'll see I'm going to come down now. And I'll pause here for a second. So here's my next line. So I'm going to bring my stitch right down to here, and then I'm going to continue back in this direction. So we'll do just a few so you can see how it gets started, and then I'll go ahead and speed it up. Okay, so here I am coming down. There's my line, so I'm going to come up and bring it over. There's a nice small one to get started with. A bigger set coming in here. You really want to make sure you dip down on the front of those waves, because otherwise they're just going to look a little bit like, you know, kind of like a bad letter C, if you will. You know, those waves really need to break. You want to make sure you include that break there. So we'll do one more here together. And I am going to pause it now, and I'm going to speed this up a little bit for you. Ready to see the storm? Let's check it out. So front is first, and the front, again, just makes a nice soft feel to this texture. I think texture-wise, what I like about this one is because it's very spread out, this feels very soft. You know, some of the others we've done, like the Emmaus Road, I'll put that link up here, because it was a more dense pattern, the fabric wasn't as smooth. So this just feels very nice and cushy, almost like very pillow-like. So let's take a look at the back, because tone on tone is always kind of hard to see, even though that's my favorite. Ta-da, here's your waves. I love our waves, you guys. This was a really fun one to do. So you'll see what I like most about the waves is the varying sizes of the waves. You know, you'll see what I did here is I almost made these look, I probably could have used a little bit more variation in here, because you'll see from here to here, your eye knows that that's not the same, but then you're like, oh, did you try to make 4 that were the same? And it makes it look like, well, they're not exactly the same, but did you try to do that? I can't really tell. So I think what would have benefited me more is to make this one or this one, you know, a much smaller one, because you can see here's small, you know, medium, 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 small. Then we come down and here's a small, and then they kind of vary. You know, this one's taller, this one comes down a little bit, this one goes back up and it's wider. And that's good. I think that variation, this one has a lot of nice variation in it. You don't necessarily have to do every other one, you know, big, small, big, small, big, small. but varying the size of those waves is really going to make them look more realistic and less like you've made a mistake. Again, if you try to make them all exactly the same size, your eye is going to be very aware of which ones are different, even if it's just slightly, than the one next to it. Adding in that variation in your waves is going to give you a lot more flexibility in not having to be so perfect, if you will, when you're making this. You know, in terms of nitpicking this one apart, not too much to pick apart. This was a pretty straightforward design. I think we're also getting a lot better, right? This is what, 17 weeks now we've been practicing. And with anything, practice makes perfect, and you just start to get more comfortable as a whole. I don't really have too many complaints with this one, to be honest with you. You know, here's a little stop-start mark. This is where I stopped to chat with you guys about how to turn the corner. So obviously you'll see when you stop, you can see them. So I would say if you have to stop, you know, if someone's calling you or you need to, I don't know, pick up your phone or something like that, try to stop at the point of the waves. That way, that's a natural sharp point, and so you won't have to worry about, you know, stopping in the middle of a curve and having to like perfectly pick that curve back up. That's a lot harder to do. But yeah, overall, this was a really fun one to do. Again, add variations. I love, you know, here's a little one, here's a big one, here's a medium one, here's another little tiny guy. Adding that variation is a lot of fun, and this makes for a really, really cool pattern. So hope you guys enjoyed sewing. I hope you enjoyed sewing this one today. I'll try that again. I also hope that you guys can keep your guys' eyes lifted up. Keep them up where they belong. Don't look down. Don't get lost in the despair. Reach out whenever you need help from anyone. Obviously, turn to prayer. That's a great first option. But you know, reach out to those around you too when you need that helping hand. Happy Friday. I enjoy your weekend. Happy sewing. We'll see you guys in the next video. If you learned a good tip today, give us a like, and thank you for subscribing. We have so many more videos coming out for you. Take care.